Even if you set aside all the hell shit, being a Christian must be terrifying. Because in order for any of their mythology to work, you have to believe that the people around you are scarcely able to contain their murderous, rapey nature. Now, this is a thought we've probably all had a number of times, but the full extent of it didn't occur to me until recently. Over on God Awful Movies, we've reviewed something like a dozen Rapture movies, and one of our running jokes throughout has been how full of themselves these Christians are. Because in every single one of these movies, the second after the Christians get vacuumed up to heaven or whatever, the world instantly descends into full-blown anarchy. And we would joke about how these filmmakers seem to think that without all the Christians to keep us honest, we'd be eating the elderly and raping the livestock within minutes. But a couple of weeks ago, I had an ex-Christian listener write in to clarify. See, we'd been characterizing this as a matter of out-of-control arrogance, but upon further examination, it seems more like out-of-control humility. Right? Because this whole concept is based on the idea that after the rapture, God is going to remove his grace from the world, and I guess God's grace is the only thing keeping our dicks out of all the puppies. And I guess that makes sense to them, right? Because if human nature isn't way more decapitating than we see every day, God really isn't doing shit, is he? So you have to pretend that Earth is perpetually a hair's breadth from chaotic dystopia, and God's grace is too busy keeping the armies of hammer-wielding atheist biker gangs at bay to worry about every little AIDS baby. It's like the anti-Tiger Rock of theological justifications. But does that mean that Christians sit there thinking to themselves, good thing we got that grace of God going on, or I would rape the shit out of that barista? I certainly hope they don't, and my guess is that they don't, but they do have to believe that everybody else is thinking that, don't they? Again, it's a necessary byproduct of their rationalization. All the non-Christians are dying for a chance to evil if it just wasn't for all that fucking grace getting in our way. That certainly fits in with their survey responses about atheists and trustworthiness, but I guess dangerous outgrouping and dehumanization, that's just a price that you have to pay if you want to sign God's name on all the good shit that happens and all the bad shit that doesn't happen. If you want to believe that God is A, benevolent, and B, in charge, you've got to assume he's thwarting most of the sex trafficking and monkey torture, right? And the only way that makes sense is if you assume that the world is loaded with people who really want to torture monkeys. And what effect does that have on your view of humanity? When I see somebody doing something philanthropic, I can say, yeah, humans are generally pretty good, aren't they? But if I was a Christian, I'd be theologically obligated to say, it's a good thing that God's grace was there to keep Bill Gates from just face-fucking all those African kids. And it isn't just detrimental to those of us in the outgroup. Sure, we all have a self-interest in beating back this nihilistic worldview, but we also owe it to the poor people trapped in the self-loathing that this breeds. After all, if the only thing keeping you from tearing the wings off of condors is God's grace, and God can remove his grace, what must you think of yourself? Look, I've got nothing against humility. I hear great things about it, but it doesn't take very long for Christian doctrines about humility to turn into psychological abuse. When an abusive husband tells his wife that she's a piece of shit and that nobody else would want her, we don't praise him for helping her learn humility, but that is exactly the tactic that Christian pastors use. You're a miserable sinner. You're not good enough for God. God shouldn't waste his time on you. You didn't deserve Christ's sacrifice. You deserve to burn in hell for touching yourself in the shower. But luckily for you, God's willing to take you back as long as you promise to never overcook the eggs again. We would clearly recognize this as abuse in any other circumstance, and yet Christians instill it in their children and call it a virtue. And at the same time, they take all of the kids' actual virtues and attribute them to a sky fairy. When you decided to give to that needy guy, that was Jesus. Without him, you'd have wiped your ass with that money and forced the homeless guy to eat it. When you decided to volunteer your time in that soup kitchen, that was Jesus. Without him, you'd have spent that time snorting cocaine off the thighs of your Vietnamese sex slaves. And when your father decided to hurt you, or when that bully decided to humiliate you, or when that priest decided to rape you, that was the real world. That was human nature. Now, never mind the implications of a God that could have stopped all the bad shit and didn't. Just set aside the problem of evil for a second and just consider what that does to your opinion of us as a species. You and I can offset all the terrible assholes and abusive people we meet by reminding ourselves that there are a tiny minority of who's actually out there. We can temper the bad with the good and see that in aggregate, people are selfless, sympathetic, and heroic when they get a chance to be. But when a Christian sees that, it's always because Jesus. And even if they can get past that somehow, they have to wonder if that person's being nice because they're nice, or if they're doing it because they need more heaven points. But atheists don't have any ulterior motives. We don't get to go to paradise. We don't get judged by omniscient ghosts. We don't get karma points that can be redeemed for valuable prizes. We get the satisfaction of knowing that we're all in this together, nobody's coming to help, and by and large, nobody wants to torture our monkeys.